Carla Jennings, a Marine veteran who lost her leg in Afghanistan, finds solace working at the Welcome Home Diner in Montana. Haunted by her brother's death and her own trauma, she serves quietly, seeking purpose. But peace shatters when Derek Slater and his drunk friends mock her disability, escalating to violence. One shoves her wheelchair, spilling coffee and her dignity. The diner freezes. No one helps. Yet, young Eli Harper and his father, Major Daniel Harper, witness the injustice. Daniel steps outside, making a call that promises retribution, setting the stage for an unforgettable reckoning. If Carla's story of resilience moved you, join our community. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories. Share your thoughts below. Comment respect to honor dignity. Support our channel to keep these tales alive, inspiring courage and decency in a world that needs it. The air in the Welcome Home Diner hung heavy with the scent of fried eggs and stale coffee, a familiar comfort that grounded Carla Jennings in the quiet rhythm of her morning shift. She maneuvered her wheelchair between tables, her hands steady as she poured refills for the regulars, her smile a practiced shield against the weight of their curious glances. But the illusion of peace shattered when a man's voice, sharp and jagged as shattered glass, cut through the hum of conversation. Wheelchairs belong at home. Not out here cluttering up public spaces, he spat, his words dripping with disdain. The diner fell silent, forks pausing midair, coffee cups hovering inches from lips. Before Carla could respond, before she could brace herself, a pair of rough hands seized the handles of her wheelchair and shoved with cruel force. She hit the floor hard, the impact jarring her bone. Hot coffee splashed across her lap, soaking her jeans, the sting of the heat secondary to the humiliation blooming in her chest. Her prosthetic leg, a constant reminder of battles fought and lost, twisted awkwardly beneath her, pinning her in a moment of vulnerability she hadn't felt since the war. Her wallet, flung from her pocket in the fall, splayed open on the linoleum, spilling its contents like secrets laid bare. Among them, a worn photograph fluttered to the ground, a snapshot of Carla in her dress blues, standing tall and proud beside her unit, her eyes bright with purpose. It drifted down slowly, like a flag lowered in defeat, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. No one moved to help, no one spoke. The only sounds were the mocking laughter from a corner booth and the scrape of Carla's hands as she dragged herself back into her chair, her jaw clenched against the pain and the shame. She refused to let these see her break, though inside her heart pounded with a mix of fury and grief. She was no stranger to fighting, but this battle felt different, raw, personal, and unbearably lonely. 30 minutes later, the low growl of a military Humvee rumbled to a stop outside the diner, its engine cutting through the lingering tension inside. 3 Marines stepped through the door, their uniforms crisp, their faces unreadable. They didn't need to say a word. Their presence alone was a statement, a silent declaration of loyalty and protection. They scanned the room, their eyes locking briefly with Carla's, and in that moment, she felt a flicker of the strength she'd once carried in the field. The diners who had laughed, who had watched her struggle in silence, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their bravado fading under the weight of the Marine's gaze. Carla's heart swelled with a quiet pride, but it was tinged with sorrow. She shouldn't have needed rescuing. Not here, not in a place she'd come to call sanctuary. Carla Jennings had been born in Shawnee, Oklahoma, a small town where the summer air carried the earthy scent of sun-baked soil and the sizzle of fried catfish from backyard cookouts. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved from sagging porches, where life moved slow and steady, like the ticking of a grandfather clock. Her father, a wiry man with grease-stained hands, ran a modest auto repair shop, his days filled with the clank of wrenches and the hum of engines. Her mother, a night-shift nurse at the county hospital, wore her exhaustion like a badge of honor, her gentle voice a balm for Carla's childhood fears. Life in Shawn was simple, predictable, until the world changed on September 11, 2001. Carla's older brother, Nathan, had always been her anchor, quick with a joke, fearless in the face of trouble, and fiercely protective when schoolyard bullies targeted her for being too quiet, too serious. He'd enlisted in the Marines straight out of high school, driven by a sense of duty that Carla admired but couldn't yet fully grasp. When the towers fell, Nathan was already overseas, serving in a world that felt impossibly far from Sean's dusty streets. He never came home. At 18, Carla stood beside her mother as a folded flag was pressed into trembling hands, the weight of it heavier than anything she'd ever carried. That moment split her life in two, before Nathan and after. It wasn't just grief that consumed her. It was a burning need to make sense of his sacrifice, to give it meaning beyond a flag and a headstone. 6 months later, Carla walked into a Marine Corps recruitment office, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshakable. She wasn't driven by anger or vengeance, but by a quiet, unshakable purpose: to honor Nathan by stepping into the life he'd chosen, to serve the country he'd believed in with every fiber of his being. Her deployments took her to the harsh, dust-choked roads of Helmand Province, Afghanistan, where every sunrise felt like a gift, every mission a gamble with fate. She earned her place among her unit not with loud bravado, but with steady, unyielding determination. Her comrades respected her for it, for the way she faced fear without flinching, for the way she carried Nathan's memory like a torch in the dark. But one afternoon, a single moment rewrote her story. An IED, hidden beneath the road like a coward's trap, detonated under her convoy's vehicle. The explosion was deafening, a roar that swallowed the world. 2 Marines died instantly, their names etched into Carla's memory like scars. Her left leg was shredded, the pain a white-hot agony that followed her into the darkness. Recovery was a war of its own. The hospital became her new battlefield, its sterile walls and endless therapy sessions a stark contrast to the chaos of combat. The physical pain was relentless, but the silence that followed was worse. No more briefings, no more boots crunching in sand, no more camaraderie of her unit. PTSD crept in like a thief, stealing sleep and replacing it with nightmares of fire and loss. Survivor's guilt gnawed at her, whispering that she should have been the one to die, that she hadn't done enough to save her friends. Learning to walk with a prosthetic leg was a daily humiliation, each stumble a reminder of what she'd lost. But Carla was a Marine, and Marines don't quit. She pushed through, driven by the same purpose that had carried her into the Corps, though now it was tinged with a quieter, more personal resolve: to rebuild, to find a new way to stand tall. After her discharge, Sean's memories felt like knives, each street corner a reminder of Nathan, of the life she could no longer live. She needed space, a place where the past couldn't follow so easily. Montana called to her with its vast skies and sleepy towns, its silence a balm for her restless mind. She settled in a small community and found work at the Welcome Home Diner, a squat building with peeling paint and a neon sign that flickered like a dying star. It wasn't much, but to Carla, it was a lifeline. 3 days a week, weekday morning, she folded napkins, poured coffee, and wiped down tables, her hands finding purpose in the rhythm of routine. Her veterans' benefits covered her modest needs: rent, groceries, the basics. But the diner gave her something more, a reason to get up, a way to quiet the memories when they grew too loud. For a while, it was enough. The regulars came to know her, not as the wounded warrior, but as Carla, the woman with a quick smile and a steady hand. The diner became her sanctuary, a place where she could breathe, where she could almost believe she was whole again. Until that morning when a stranger's cruelty reminded her how fragile that peace could be. Carla found solace in the diner's predictable hum, a sanctuary where the world still held a semblance of order. The simple tasks, refilling sugar jars, stacking coffee mugs with their chipped rims, wiping down counters until they gleamed, gave her a purpose that anchored her restless spirit. It was a place where she could move with intention, each action a small rebellion against the chaos she'd left behind. Mike, the diner's owner, had offered her the job with a quiet nod and a firm handshake. A Vietnam vet with a limp that spoke of battles long past, he carried himself with a stoic grace, his words sparse but heavy with meaning when he chose to speak. He never pried about her prosthetic leg, never let his gaze linger with the pity she'd grown to dread. That first handshake was a silent contract, equal, unadorned, and brimming with a dignity that warmed Carla's chest like a rare, fleeting sunrise. In that moment, she felt seen, not as a wounded veteran, but as a person capable of contributing something worthwhile. Her days at the diner settled into a rhythm that soothed her jagged edges. She arrived before dawn when the sky was still a deep, bruised purple, the air crisp with the promise of a new day. Unlocking the doors, she'd flick on the lights, their soft glow spilling across the empty tables. The kitchen, quiet and still, felt like a sacred space as she moved through it with the precision of a Marine preparing for inspection. Chairs came down from tabletops with a satisfying thud, the coffee machine gurgled to life, and the blinds snapped up to reveal the first streaks of morning light. Everything had its place, and she ensured it stayed that way. The regulars trickled in with comforting predictability. Grizzled ranchers with faces carved by years under the sun, truckers with weary eyes and road dust on their boots, and the local school teacher, Miss Harlan, who always requested her bacon extra crispy with a shy smile. Most didn't know Carla's name, and she preferred it that way. A nod here, a muttered thank you there. Those were enough. She wasn't chasing their attention or their stories. She craved the peace that came with the clatter of plates, the low hum of the refrigerator, the rhythmic tap of forks against ceramic. After the relentless noise of war, screams, explosions, the constant thrum of fear, these sounds were a balm, a reminder that safety could exist in the ordinary. But not every moment was peaceful. There were days, rare but sharp, when someone's gaze would snag on her prosthetic leg, their whispers slicing through the diner's hum like a misfired shot. Sometimes it was a muttered comment, barely audible. Other times it was a loud, careless remark that made her skin prickle. Carla had learned to let it roll off her, a skill honed in the Marines where you picked your battles with care. Pride wasn't worth fighting for in a diner booth, not when she'd already given so much. Still, each comment stung, not because it made her feel fragile, but because it reminded her that, to some, her sacrifice was a flaw, a mark of weakness rather than a testament to her strength. She stayed because the diner offered her a way to serve again, quietly on her own terms, weaving her into a world that didn't demand she explain herself. It was just after the lunch rush on a Thursday, the air thick with the scent of grease and coffee, when the doorbell jangled with an aggressive clang, as if someone had yanked it open to announce their presence rather than enter. Carla didn't look up immediately, her hands busy clearing table 6, stacking plates with the efficiency of muscle memory. But she heard them, 4 men, their laughter loud and unearned, spilling into the diner like an unwelcome tide. The smell of cheap whiskey and stale cigarettes followed them, their heavy boots thudding against the tile floor. Her stomach nodded, a familiar instinct flaring before her eyes confirmed the source. Derek Slater. She hadn't seen him in years, but his name carried weight in this small town, and not the good kind. Dishonorably discharged, he was a man who wore his camo jacket like a badge he hadn't earned, starting bar fights and getting himself banned from the VFW for disrespecting a retired colonel. His ego filled the room before he did, his 3 buddies trailing behind, their voices just as brash, their laughter grating against her nerves. "Well, well," Derek drawled, his voice dripping with mockery as he spotted her. "If it ain't the half-Marine." The words landed like a punch, deliberate and cruel. Carla kept her eyes on the table, wiping it in slow, deliberate circles, her breath steadying through a technique she'd mastered long ago. Inhale, hold, exhale. She had nothing to prove to this man, no need to engage with his taunts. But the air in the diner shifted, the comfortable rhythm disrupted. A few patrons glanced over, their eyes darting away just as quickly, unwilling to get involved. Brittany, the young waitress behind the counter, froze mid-pour, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the coffee pot. Carla straightened, her notepad in hand, and approached their booth with measured steps. "Can I get you gentlemen something to drink?" she asked, her voice calm, professional, betraying none of the anger simmering beneath her skin. Derek sprawled across the booth, his posture lazy but calculated, his eyes glinting with a challenge she had no intention of meeting. "Still serving food, huh?" he said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Thought the health department had rules about defective hands." The words hung in the air, sharp and ugly, but Carla held her ground, her pen poised over the notepad, waiting for their order. She was here to do her job, not to fight a battle she'd already won by surviving. In the bustling diner, Derek sprawled across the booth, his broad frame dominating the space as if he owned every inch of the place. His posture screamed entitlement, legs splayed wide, arms draped carelessly over the backrest, a king on a greasy vinyl throne. His buddies, a trio of rough-around-the-edges guys, mirrored his arrogance, their laughter sharp and mean, slicing through the hum of clinking dishes and murmured conversations. "Sure thing, Wheels. Roll on over," Derek called out, his voice dripping with mockery as Carla, the waitress, approached their table. His friends erupted in laughter, not because the jab was clever, but because cruelty often craves an audience to amplify its sting. Their chuckles were jagged, a chorus of malice that hung in the air like smoke. Carla, undeterred, maneuvered her wheelchair with practiced grace, her movements steady despite the weight of their words. She felt the familiar burn of humiliation in her chest, but she buried it deep, where it couldn't touch her. As she set the menus down with meticulous care, Derek leaned toward his crew, his voice loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Bet she lost that leg shuffling papers in some cushy office in the green zone. Real war hero, huh?" The words cut, sharp and deliberate, meant to wound. Inside, Carla's heart twisted, but her face remained a mask of calm. She'd heard worse, far worse, in places where the air smelled of dust and blood, where insults weren't thrown in jest but in silence, with the cold precision of a sniper's aim. "Today's special is meatloaf," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the storm brewing inside her. "Perfect," Derek shot back, smirking. "Matches the company, soft, bland, and full of scraps." His buddies roared, their laughter bouncing off the diner's faded walls, a sound that grated against Carla's nerves like sandpaper. She rolled away, her dignity a quiet shield, but beneath it, something smoldered. A spark of anger, of exhaustion, of the weight of carrying herself through a world that seemed determined to knock her down. She'd survived worse than Derek Slater's petty barbs. In the desert, the enemy didn't waste breath on insults. They laid traps, silent and deadly, their hatred carved into the earth itself. Derek's taunts were just noise, irritating, grating, but survivable. For now. As she cleared a nearby table, wiping crumbs into her hand with mechanical precision, Derek's voice slithered through the air again, low and theatrical, meant to draw every eye in the diner. "You know what I don't get?" he said, pausing to take a slow sip of his beer, letting the moment stretch for maximum effect. "How the Marines ever let women in, especially ones who come back incomplete." The word hung heavy, a blade aimed at her core. His friends choked on their laughter, slamming the table as if they were at a comedy club, their glee a venom that spread through the room. Carla's jaw clenched so tightly it ached, the muscles pulsing with the effort to hold herself together. She wheeled past them, eyes fixed ahead, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside, her mind churned. She thought of the endless nights in the hospital, the phantom pain in a leg that was no longer there, the faces of her squad, some gone forever, some still haunting her dreams. She'd fought for them, for herself, for something bigger than this small-town diner and its small-minded bullies. She wouldn't let them see her break. Then came the moment that shattered the air like a pane of glass. One of Derek's friends, a hulking man with patchy stubble and the sour reek of stale sweat, stood up as Carla turned toward the kitchen. "We're talking to you, soldier girl," he sneered, his voice thick with contempt. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge him, her focus locked on the swinging doors ahead. That's when he acted, crossing a line no one should cross. Without warning, without permission, he grabbed the handles of her wheelchair and shoved. The world tilted violently. Her chair crashed into the edge of a table, the impact jarring her bones. The chair tipped, and Carla fell, her body slamming against the cold tile floor. A mug of hot coffee tipped over, splashing across her shirt and lap, the scalding liquid searing her skin. Her prosthetic leg twisted awkwardly beneath her, a cruel reminder of her loss. Her wallet burst open, spilling its contents. Her phone skittered across the floor, and a faded photograph, the one she always kept tucked behind her ID, the one that meant more to her than anything, fluttered down, landing face down on the tile. The diner fell silent, the kind of stillness that feels like the world holding its breath. Forks hung in midair. Conversations died. Brittany, the young waitress behind the counter, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. but she didn't move. Mike, the owner, took a half step forward, his face a mix of shock and indecision, then stopped, rooted to the spot. No one helped. No one spoke. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint drip of coffee pooling on the floor. Carla lay there, the burn of the coffee stinging her thigh, her shoulder throbbing from the impact. Her chest rose and fell with the slow, deliberate breaths she'd learned in combat. Breaths that kept panic at bay, that held her together when everything else fell apart. She closed her eyes for a moment, grounding herself, feeling the cold tiles against her palms, the weight of every eye in the room on her. Then she moved. With the strength that had carried her through years of loss and adaptation, she pushed herself upright. Her arms, lean and powerful from years of compensating for her legs, braced against the floor. Her face remained a fortress, unyielding, even as her fingers reached for the photograph. She picked it up, her touch gentle, almost reverent, and tucked it back into her wallet. No tears fell, no words escaped her lips. There was only the quiet sound of her dignity pulling itself together, piece by piece, as she righted her chair and lifted herself back into it. The effort was immense, not just physically but emotionally, a silent battle against the humiliation, the pain, the injustice of it all. But Carla was a warrior, and warriors don't break. Not here, not now. Across the diner, a pair of wide, innocent eyes watched it all unfold. 8-year-old Eli Harper sat frozen in his booth, his half-eaten grilled cheese forgotten on the plate in front of him. His chocolate milk sat untouched, condensation dripping down the glass, pooling on the table. His small hands were balled into fists, knuckles white, gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored. His heart raced, a mix of fear and anger swirling in his chest. He didn't understand everything, why those men were so mean, why they'd hurt Carla, why no one was helping, but he felt the wrongness of it deep in his bones. Beside him his mother sat, her face pale, her own hands trembling as she reached for her son, unsure how to explain the cruelty of the world to a child who still believed in fairness. In the dim glow of the welcome home diner, the air felt thick with the weight of unspoken stories. Major Daniel Harper sat at a worn wooden table, his wife, Emily, beside him, her face frozen in a quiet shock that seemed to anchor her to the moment. Their young son, Eli, fidgeted with a straw wrapper, his wide eyes darting between his parents and the woman across the room. Carla Jennings. Daniel's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on Carla with an intensity that betrayed a storm of emotions churning beneath his composed exterior. To anyone else, it might have looked like a fleeting glance, but to those who knew him, it was a look that carried the weight of battles fought, losses endured, and a silent vow that this moment, this injustice, had sliced through him like a blade through years of hardened resolve. Eli, with the innocent curiosity only a child could muster, tugged at his father's sleeve, his small fingers pulling at the crisp fabric of Daniel's jacket. "Dad, was she a soldier too? Like you?" His voice was soft, hopeful, seeking connection in a world he was only beginning to understand. Daniel didn't respond immediately. His eyes traced a slow path from Carla, who sat upright now, brushing coffee stains from her shirt with a quiet dignity that spoke of resilience, to the prosthetic leg partially visible beneath the table. His gaze lingered on the fallen photo she had just retrieved from the floor, her fingers moving with a practiced grace as she tucked it back into her wallet. The Marine Corps insignia on her jacket caught the fading light, its worn edges a testament to years of service. Daniel's throat tightened, a flood of memories, comrades lost, promises made, welling up unbidden. "Yes," he said at last, his voice low and taut, laced with a reverence and pain he couldn't fully conceal. From the looks of it, a real one. He stood then, his movements deliberate, as if each step was a decision in itself. There was no outburst, no raised voice to draw attention. Daniel Harper didn't need theatrics to command a room. He placed his napkin beside his plate with a precision born of discipline, pulled out his phone and strode toward the diner's exit with a steady, purposeful gait. Outside, the Montana horizon stretched wide, the sun dipping low, painting the street in hues of soft gold and amber. The beauty of it felt almost mocking against the weight in his chest. He pressed the phone to his ear, his voice steady but urgent. "Hey, it's Harper." he said, the words clipped. Efficient? I need a favor. He paused, glancing back through the diner's window at Carla, her silhouette a quiet monument to strength. I'm at a place called the Welcome Home Diner. One of ours is here, Carla Jennings, Staff Sergeant, Marine Corps. I just saw something happen that shouldn't have. Yeah, she's okay, but it's bad and she didn't deserve it. His voice dropped lower, the urgency sharpening. She didn't say a word. That's why I'm calling. Because someone should. He hung up, his eyes lingering on the fading light, the golden streaks now tinged with the first hints of dusk. For a moment he stood still, letting the weight of his decision settle, then turned and walked back inside. Eli looked up as his father returned, his young face bright with hope, searching for reassurance. Daniel met his son's gaze and gave a nod. Not the soft, comforting kind meant to soothe the child's fears, but the resolute kind, the kind that signaled the beginning of something significant. Something had shifted in the diner, a subtle undercurrent that rippled through the clink of silverware and the murmur of conversations. The quiet that followed wasn't the warm, familiar hush of a small-town diner. It was heavy, suffocating, the kind of silence that settles in the wake of something deeply wrong when everyone pretends not to notice but feels the weight all the same. Carla sat at her usual corner table, her wheelchair positioned just so, her damp clothes clinging to her skin from the spilled coffee. Her prosthetic leg, slightly askew, remained untouched. She didn't bother adjusting it. Her hands rested in her lap, steady but still, as if anchoring her against the storm of emotions she refused to let surface. The photo, now safely tucked back in her wallet, was a private talisman, a fragment of a life before this moment. She stared out of the window, her eyes tracing the horizon. But her mind was elsewhere, perhaps in the dust of a far-off battlefield, or in the laughter of comrades long gone. Across the room, Derek and his group sat in their booth, their earlier laughter now subdued, but their smug glances still drifted toward her like tendrils of smoke, sharp and lingering. Then the air shifted. A low, rumbling growl broke the silence, growing louder, more distinct, a sound that didn't belong in the quiet streets of this Montana town. It was the unmistakable roar of a vehicle built for deserts and war zones, not diners. Every head in the diner turned toward the window as a tan, dust-worn military Humvee rolled up, stopping directly in front of the Welcome Home Diner with a purpose that seemed to radiate from its very frame. It didn't park, it halted, deliberate and unyielding. The engine cut off and the door swung open. 3 Marines stepped out, their presence commanding the room before they even crossed the threshold. The first was a barrel-chested gunnery sergeant, his hair streaked with a gray, his frame towering, yet marked by a slight limp. He leaned lightly on a polished oak cane, its rhythmic tap against the floor a steady cadence that seemed to echo with authority. Behind him came a younger sergeant, clean-cut and steady, pushing an empty wheelchair with a quiet determination. Last was a female captain, her uniform adorned with medals that gleamed under the diner's fluorescent lights, each one a silent testament to battles fought in distant lands. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The weight of their presence swept through the diner like a tidal wave, silencing conversations, stilling forks, and freezing Brittany, the waitress, mid-pour, her hand trembling over the coffee pot. The 3 Marines moved as one, their steps deliberate, their focus unwavering as they made their way straight to Carla's corner. The diner held its breath, the heavy silence now charged with anticipation, as if the very walls knew something monumental was about to unfold. In the quiet hum of the Montana roadside diner, the air carried the faint clatter of dishes and the low murmur of conversations. At a small table near the window, Staff Sergeant Carla Jennings sat in her wheelchair, her hands resting lightly on the worn formica surface. Her eyes, sharp yet weary, traced the grain of the tabletop, each scratch and stain a silent testament to the countless stories that had unfolded here. She'd grown accustomed to the solitude that clung to her like a shadow since her injury, a constant companion through years of recovery and adaptation. But today, something felt different, a subtle shift in the air, like the calm before a storm. The door swung open with a jingle, and Gunnery Sergeant Martinez stepped inside, his presence commanding the room without a single word. Despite the limp that marked each step, a badge of battles fought and survived, He moved with a purpose that seemed to pull the very walls of the diner closer. He stopped beside Carla's table, his broad shoulders squared, his bearing as unyielding as the Montana mountains outside. With a crisp salute honed by decades of service, he addressed her. "Staff Sergeant Jennings," he said, his voice steady and resonant, carrying the weight of respect earned through years of discipline. "Please forgive our delayed response, ma'am." Carla's breath caught, her heart stuttering in her chest. For a moment, she was back in uniform, standing tall among her brothers and sisters in arms. Her training took over, instinctive and unyielding. Her spine straightened, her shoulders lifted, and her hand rose in a salute that trembled only slightly, precise despite the emotions swirling within her. "At ease, Gunnery Sergeant Martinez," she replied, her voice cutting through the fog of exhaustion that had settled over her in recent weeks. It was clearer now, infused with a strength she hadn't realized she still possessed. In that fleeting exchange, the room seemed to shift. The weight Carla had carried alone for so long, through hospital rooms, sleepless nights, and the quiet ache of being unseen, was suddenly shared, reflected back at her in the unwavering gaze of a fellow Marine. The diner fell silent, not with the tension of fear, but with a profound awe that seemed to ripple outward from Carla's table. Every patron, from the truckers nursing their coffees to the families sharing plates of pancakes, paused, their attention drawn to the three Marines now standing beside Carla. Their uniforms were immaculate, their boots polished to a mirror shine, planted firmly like sentinels guarding something sacred. It wasn't just their presence that held the room. It was the unspoken purpose they carried, a legacy of service that transcended the moment. Captain Leah Simmons stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with a precision that could slice through any resistance. Her eyes, steady and unflinching, swept the diner, taking in every face before settling on Derek Slater and his crew at their booth across the room. "We received a call," she said, her words deliberate, each one landing like a stone in still water. "A report from a fellow officer who witnessed a decorated combat veteran in a wheelchair assaulted by civilians. We're here in response." Her tone carried no accusation, only fact, but the weight of her words settled heavily, silencing the room further. In Derek's booth, the air grew thick with discomfort. The laughter that had spilled so freely earlier, when Derek had shoved Carla's wheelchair, his arrogance filling the space like a storm cloud, evaporated. The man who had pushed her now sat rigid, his eyes fixed on the condensation dripping down his glass, as if he could hide from the truth staring back at him. Derek's jaw clenched, his usual bravado replaced by a hollow silence. The confidence that had fueled his earlier taunts drained from his face, leaving behind a flicker of shame he couldn't quite mask. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez turned back to Carla, his expression softening but his voice firm. "With all due respect, Staff Sergeant, what happened here is not nothing. It's not just disrespect, it's dishonor." His words carried a quiet fury, not for himself but for the violation of something deeper, something sacred. Carla felt her chest tighten, not with pain, but with a warmth she hadn't known in years. Martinez's words weren't just for her. They were a call to everyone in the room, a reminder of the values that bound them all. From the back corner of the diner, movement stirred. An elderly man, his Korean War veteran cap slightly askew, rose slowly from his seat. His hands trembled with age, but his back straightened as if pulled by the memory of parades and battlefields long past. His eyes, clouded with time, shone with a fierce pride as he stood in silent solidarity. Beside him, a middle-aged woman with an Air Force pin gleaming on her lapel rose from her stool, her face solemn but resolute. Her heart raced with memories of her own service, of moments when she'd stood for something greater than herself. Then from another table, three men in civilian clothes stood, their posture betraying their military roots. National Guard, perhaps, or veterans who carried their service quietly until this moment demanded otherwise. They stood at attention, their movements synchronized, as if answering an unspoken command. The diner seemed to hold its breath, the weight of their collective resolve filling the space. "Attention!" The command came from Major Daniel Harper, who had just stepped back inside from the parking lot. Though dressed in civilian clothes, his bearing screamed of a life spent in service. His voice, sharp and authoritative, carried the weight of years spent leading men and women through chaos. Half the diner rose, old and young, active, duty, and retired, civilians and veterans alike. They stood not out of obligation, but out of a deep, instinctual respect that transcended rank or time. It was a recognition of something older, something that bound them all in this fleeting moment. Carla's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't fear or even surprise that stirred within her. It was something deeper, something akin to coming home after years of wandering. For so long she had stood alone, her strength a quiet fire that burned through endless days of endurance. But now in this small Montana diner, surrounded by strangers who had become witnesses and Marines who had become family, she felt a connection she hadn't known she'd been missing. Her heart, so long weighed down by the silence of her struggles, seemed to loosen, the tightness in her chest giving way to a warmth that spread like sunlight. As the last patron rose, standing in silent respect, Carla's gaze softened. She had rolled through countless days, her wheelchair both a limitation and a testament to her resilience. She had faced the world's indifference, the careless glances, the moments of cruelty like Derek's. But here, in this moment, she wasn't alone. The room was filled with people who saw her, not just the wheelchair, not just the injury, but the woman who had served, who had sacrificed, who had carried on. Captain Simmons gave a small nod to the waitress, Brittany, who stood wide-eyed but composed behind the counter. 4 coffees, black, she said, her voice steady but warm, a quiet acknowledgement of the moment's gravity. Brittany nodded, her hands moving quickly to pour the coffee, her own heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. She didn't fully understand the weight of what had unfolded, but she felt it, the unspoken bond that had transformed the diner into something more than a roadside stop. For Carla, the relief was palpable, a quiet tide that washed over her, soothing the edges of wounds she hadn't realized still ached. She sat taller in her chair, her hands steady now, her eyes bright with a renewed sense of belonging. In this moment, she wasn't just Staff Sergeant Jennings' wounded veteran. She was part of something larger, a family forged not by blood, but by honor, respect, and the shared weight of service. Carla's hands flew across the counter, deftly arranging plates and cups to fulfill the order with a precision born of habit. Her movements weren't driven by panic, but by a deep-seated reverence, a quiet acknowledgement of the moment's weight. She glanced up as 3 Marines settled into her corner booth at the Welcome Home Diner, their ease suggesting they'd claimed that spot countless times before. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez, his face etched with lines of experience, propped his cane carefully against the booth's edge, his hands folding together with a deliberate calm that spoke of battles fought and survived. Sergeant O'Connor, ever attentive, maneuvered the spare wheelchair to rest just beside Carla's own, offering her a warm, respectful smile that carried a hint of camaraderie. "Figured you might want options, sister," he said, his voice light, but laced with a sincerity that tugged at her heart. For a fleeting moment, Carla's lips twitched toward a smile, her guarded exterior softening under the glow of their familiar presence. The trio's conversation flowed effortlessly, a tapestry woven from memories of shared hardship. They didn't dwell on the medals pinned to their chests or the scars hidden beneath their clothes. Instead, their words danced around lighter moments, grit-filled sandstorms that stung their eyes, tasteless rations that sparked endless complaints, and the absurd, unspoken bonds forged in chaos. Their laughter was shutty and restrained, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. To an outsider, their shorthand might have seemed cryptic, but to Carla, it was a language she knew by heart, a dialect spoken only by those who'd stood shoulder to shoulder in the crucible of service. The exchange wasn't loud or performative. It was raw, authentic. And for Carla, it was a lifeline to a part of herself she thought she'd left behind. Martinez's voice cut through the hum of memory, his tone warm with recollection. "Remember that convoy, Carla? Took a wrong turn in the dead of night, and you, stubborn as ever, got us back on track using nothing but the stars." His eyes sparkled with pride, and Carla's faint smirk betrayed a flicker of nostalgia. She could still feel the cool desert air, the weight of responsibility pressing down as she traced constellations to guide her team to safety. "Stars and sheer grit," O'Connor chimed in, his grin wide but tinged with reverence. "That's what kept us breathing. No question about it." Captain Simmons, ever the quiet observer, leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady on Carla. "You didn't just serve out there," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You led. That's not something you leave behind." His words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through her thoughts. Carla's eyes dropped to her coffee, the steam curling upward like whispers of her past. The warmth of the mug grounded her, but her mind churned. That life's gone, she thought. The words heavy with a truth she'd carried since the day her world changed. The injury, the wheelchair, the endless adjustments, they'd build a wall between her and the soldier she'd been. Yet, Simmons' voice broke through again, gentle but unyielding. "With respect, Carla, the core of who you are, it doesn't fade. It doesn't forget you, and neither do we." His sincerity stirred something deep within her, a mix of pride and ache she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Around them, the diner began to stir back to life. The clink of plates resumed, conversations hummed softly, but the atmosphere had shifted. The patrons' glances toward Carla were no longer tinged with pity or curiosity. Instead, their eyes held a quiet respect, a recognition of the strength she carried. At a nearby booth, Derek Slater sat in silence, his usual bravado extinguished. No snide remarks, no careless laughter, just a heavy, uncomfortable stillness that spoke volumes. Carla lifted her coffee to her lips, the bitter warmth flooding her senses. It tasted like resilience, like the courage she'd forgotten she still possessed. A week later, the Welcome Home diner was transformed, though no one had sounded a trumpet or called the local papers. On a quiet morning, the flickering neon sign out front was gone, replaced by one with bold, hand-painted letters that declared, "Diner of the Brave. Every soldier has a place here." The change wasn't just in the sign, it was woven into the very soul of the place. The booths remained worn but familiar. The coffee still brewed a touch too strong, the bacon crisp to perfection. Yet, something new adorned the far wall, a veteran's wall of honor. Rows of framed photographs now lined the space, each capturing a face, young and old, men and women from every branch of the military. Beneath each image, a simple inscription listed name, rank, and years of service, a quiet tribute to lives shaped by duty. At Carla's usual corner booth, a small brass plaque gleamed, permanently fixed to the table. It read, "Reserved for veterans in honor of Staff Sergeant Carla Jennings." She hadn't been told about it, hadn't asked for the recognition. When she rolled in that morning and saw it, her breath caught. For a long moment she stared at the plaque, her heart caught between a sob and a laugh. The words etched in brass seemed to pulse with meaning, a reminder that her service wasn't just a chapter closed, but a legacy that endured. She set her coffee down gently, her fingers brushing the plaque's edge as if to anchor herself. With a quiet nod to no one but herself, she felt a shift, an acceptance of the honor, a reconnection to the woman she'd always been. From that day forward, the diner became a beacon. Veterans who once passed through town without a glance began to linger. Some were grizzled, their hats adorned with faded patches from Korea, Vietnam, or Desert Storm, their stories locked tightly within. Others were young, their eyes still searching for a place where they could be more than their uniforms, where they could be human. They found that place at Carla's booth. It became a sanctuary, a space where shared glances and knowing nods spoke louder than words. And Carla, she kept coming back. Each visit was a quiet act of reclaiming her place, not just in the diner, but in the world she'd fought for. Her coffee, once just a ritual, now tasted like home, like belonging, like the courage to keep moving forward. Carla Jennings moved through her shifts at the diner with a steady rhythm, folding napkins with deliberate care and pouring coffee with a practiced hand. The work was familiar, grounding, but now something was different. She wore her Marine Corps pin on her uniform, not as a badge of pride or a call for attention, but as a quiet signal to others who might feel unseen. It was her way of whispering to every veteran who walked through the door, "I see you, you're not alone." The pin gleamed faintly under the diner's fluorescent lights, a small beacon of solidarity in a world that often rushed past such things. Even Rick Lawson, the diner's manager, had changed. Once a man who urged his staff to keep their heads down and avoid trouble, He now carried himself with a newfound purpose. Gone was the faded ball cap he used to wear, replaced by a crisp, pressed shirt adorned with a small American flag pin on the collar. His transformation wasn't born of obligation or corporate mandate. It came from a shift deep within. Rick began greeting every veteran who entered the diner with a warm handshake or a nod of respect, his eyes meeting theirs with genuine acknowledgement. He introduced a discount for service members, not because it was good business, but because it felt like the right thing to do, a way to honor the sacrifices he'd come to understand more deeply. Every gesture carried the weight of his quiet regret for the years he hadn't fully seen the veterans in his midst. The booth in the corner, once a place where Derek Slater and his buddies had jeered at Carla, now sat empty. It wasn't fear that kept people away. No one was afraid of Carla or her past. It was respect. The townsfolk had learned through whispers and stories what that booth had once witnessed. They understood now, in a way they hadn't before, that dishonoring the brave was a line you didn't cross. Not in this town, not ever again. The empty booth became a silent monument, a reminder of the cost of careless words and the power of redemption. Carla never wanted to be a symbol. The idea of standing out made her uneasy, her heart racing at the thought of being put on a pedestal. She didn't crave admiration or applause. She just wanted to do her job, to keep moving forward despite the memories that sometimes clawed at her in the quiet moments. But after that day, after the plaque was hung on the diner's wall, after the salute from a stranger who'd heard her story, after the wall of veterans' photos began to grow, people saw her differently. Their gazes softened when she passed by. Their voices carried a new warmth when they said her name. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Carla began to see herself differently too. The weight of her past, the scars she carried both on her body and in her heart, started to feel less like a burden and more like a map of where she'd been and what she'd overcome. It started small, as most meaningful things do. One evening, just as the diner was about to close, a young soldier stepped through the door. His uniform was crisp, but his shoulders were tense, his eyes darting around the room like he was searching for something he couldn't name. He clutched his cap in both hands, fingers twisting nervously around the brim, unsure whether he belonged in this place. Carla noticed him immediately. She always noticed the ones who carried that kind of quiet unease. She rolled her wheelchair over to him, her movements smooth and unhurried, and looked up with a gentle smile that held no judgment. "First time shipping out?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The young man nodded, his throat tight with unspoken fears. "Grab a seat," she said, gesturing to the table near her. "The coffee's decent, and I'm not half bad to talk to." He sat, his gratitude evident in the way his shoulders relaxed just a fraction. They didn't say much at first, just shared the silence over steaming mugs of coffee. Carla didn't push him to talk. She knew better than most that sometimes words weren't ready to come. But there was something in the air, a quiet understanding that settled between them like a warm blanket. When he left that night, his steps were a little lighter, his eyes less haunted. He wasn't alone anymore. Not in that moment, and that small shift felt like a victory to Carla, one she tucked away in her heart. Word of that encounter spread through the town like wildfire. Soon, Carla's corner booth became more than just a place to sit. It transformed into a sanctuary, a haven where young recruits came to find courage before their first deployments, where older veterans came to share stories or sit in the comfort of someone who understood their silences, and where civilians came to listen, not just to hear, but to truly understand for the first time. The booth became a post, a gathering place where stories of service, sacrifice, and resilience were exchanged over coffee and pie. It was where people found connection, where the weight of their experiences could be shared, even if just for a moment. One day, the local high school reached out with an unexpected request. They were organizing a Veterans Appreciation Week and wanted Carla to speak to the students. Her first instinct was to decline. Public speaking wasn't her strength. She was a woman of action, not words. The thought of standing in front of a room full of teenagers, their eyes fixed on her, made her stomach twist with nerves. But something deeper tugged at her. A quiet voice that whispered this was important, that her story could matter to someone else. So, against her better judgment, she said yes. When the day came, Carla stood before the auditorium, her heart pounding but her voice steady. She didn't talk about the chaos of war or the details of battles she'd rather forget. Instead, she spoke of duty, the kind that keeps you moving forward even when you're exhausted. She spoke of discipline, the quiet strength it takes to do what's right when no one's watching. And she spoke of what it means to carry someone else's weight when they can't carry it themselves, to stand up for those who can't stand at all. The uniform doesn't make you a Marine, she told the sea of young faces, her words clear and deliberate. It's what you do when the world tries to break you. It's choosing to serve, to keep going, even when you could walk away. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling over the students. Then, one by one, they stood to applaud. Afterward, they lined up to shake her hand, their eyes bright with questions and admiration. A few even asked how they could enlist, their voices trembling with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Carla answered them honestly, her words laced with both encouragement and caution, knowing the path they were considering wasn't an easy one. As she spoke to them, something shifted inside her. The pain was still there, the limp she sometimes hid with a quick joke, the memories that woke her in the middle of the night, the scars that told stories she'd never share. But now that pain had a purpose. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about guiding others, mentoring them, showing them they belonged. In that moment, Carla Jennings became more than a soldier, more than a survivor. She became a bridge, a connection between generations of veterans, between the silence of unspoken struggles and the pride of service. She carried her history not on her sleeve, but in the quiet way she showed up every day, folding napkins, pouring coffee, and pretending the ache in her body didn't linger. She never asked for recognition, never sought the spotlight. But when the world tried to knock her down, Carla Jennings stood taller, not for herself, but for everyone who needed her to. Carla stepped into the diner that crisp autumn morning, her worn boots scuffing softly against the checkered floor, each step a quiet testament to a life of perseverance. Her limp, a remnant of her service overseas, was subtle but unmistakable, a scar etched not just into her body, but into her soul. She carried herself with a quiet pride, her eyes scanning the familiar faces of the small-town diner, folks sipping coffee, flipping through newspapers, or chatting over plates of eggs and bacon. To them, she was just Carla, the woman who'd come back from the war a little quieter, a little more guarded, but still one of their own. Inside, though, she wrestled with the weight of memories she rarely shared, the deafening roar of explosions, the faces of comrades lost, and the gnawing question of whether the world she'd fought for still valued people like her. She slid into a booth by the window, her fingers tracing the edge of the laminated menu as she tried to focus on the mundane comfort of choosing between pancakes or oatmeal. But her heart was heavy, her mind replaying the sidelong glances she'd caught on her walk to the diner. Whispers from strangers who saw her limp and assumed they knew her story. She pushed the thoughts away, forcing a small smile as the waitress, Jenny, approached with a pot of coffee. Jenny's eyes were kind, but Carla could sense the pity lurking behind them, a silent acknowledgement of the town's unspoken narrative. Poor Carla, the broken veteran. It stung, but she swallowed it, down nodding as Jenny filled her cup. The diner's hum was shattered when a group of young men burst through the door, their laughter loud and careless, their voices carrying an edge of bravado. They sprawled into a nearby booth, their presence commanding attention. Carla barely glanced their way, but one of them, a broad-shouldered guy with a smirk, zeroed in on her. Maybe it was her limp as she'd walked in, or the way she sat alone, her posture unyielding despite her quiet demeanor. Whatever it was, he saw her as an easy target. "Hey, Grandma," he called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "What's with the gimp leg? Trip over your walker?" His friends snickered, egging him on, their laughter a sharp blade cutting through the diner's warmth. Carla froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. The words hit like a punch, stirring a storm of emotions she'd fought to keep buried. Shame for the body that no longer moved like it used to, anger at the casual cruelty of a stranger, and a bone-deep exhaustion from carrying the weight of disrespect. For a moment, she considered ignoring him, letting the moment pass like she'd done so many times before. But something inside her snapped, not with rage, but with a quiet, resolute defiance. She set her cup down, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest, and turned to face him. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, met his. "I earned this limp serving this country," she said, her voice low but clear, each word deliberate. "What have you earned, sitting there mocking someone you don't even know?" The diner fell silent. Jenny paused mid-pour at the counter, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and admiration. A young boy at a nearby table, clutching his father's hand, stared at Carla, his small face a canvas of curiosity and awe. The man's friends shifted uncomfortably, their laughter dying in their throats, but the instigator's smirk only widened. He leaned forward, undeterred, his voice laced with venom. "Oh, big hero, huh? Nobody cares about your war stories, lady. Sit down before you hurt yourself." The words were meant to wound, to push her back into silence, but Carla didn't flinch. She felt the sting, yes, but beneath it was a fire kindled by years of resilience, by nights spent piecing herself back together when the world seemed determined to tear her apart. She stood, her movements slow but deliberate, her limp more pronounced under the weight of every eye in the room. The pain in her leg flared, but she ignored it, her focus locked on the man who thought he could break her with words. "I don't need your respect," she said, her voice steady now, carrying the weight of a truth she'd earned through blood and sacrifice. "But I'll be damned if I let you disrespect every person who's fought for you to sit there and run your mouth." The words hung in the air, heavy with conviction, and for the first time the man's smirk faltered. He opened his mouth to retort, but no words came. The silence was deafening, a collective holding of breath as the diner absorbed the power of her stand. Carla didn't wait for a response. She turned, her head high, and walked toward the door, each step a quiet rebellion against the cruelty she'd faced. Her heart pounded, a mix of fear and pride swirling within her. She wondered if she'd gone too far, if her words would only invite more scorn, but deep down she knew she'd done what her soul demanded. As she reached the door, Jenny's voice broke the silence. "Carla?" she called softly, her tone thick with emotion. "Your coffee's on the house." It was a small gesture, but to Carla, it felt like a lifeline, a reminder that not everyone looked away. Outside, the cool air hit her face and she exhaled, her breath visible in the morning chill. She felt the weight of the moment settle into her bones, not as a burden, but as a quiet triumph. She'd fallen before, on battlefields, in hospital beds, in the dark corners of her own mind, but she'd always gotten back up. Today was no different. She walked away, her limp a badge of survival, her heart buoyed by the knowledge that she'd refused to be broken. Back in the diner, the moment lingered. Jenny wiped the counter, her hands trembling as she replayed Carla's words in her mind. She felt a pang of guilt for all the times she'd stayed silent, assuming someone else would step in. The young boy, still gripping his father's hand, whispered, "Dad, was that lady a hero?" His father, a man who'd never served but knew the cost of sacrifice, nodded slowly. "Yeah, son," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She's the real kind." The man who'd mocked Carla sat in silence, his bravado stripped away, his mind grappling with the shame of his actions. He wouldn't admit it, not then, but a seed of doubt had been planted, a question about who he wanted to be. Carla's stand didn't just ripple through the diner, it reshaped the town. Word spread, carried by hushed conversations at the grocery store, over backyard fences, in church pews. People began to see her differently, not as the broken veteran, but as a woman of unshakable dignity, a living reminder that honor doesn't always roar. It's the quiet strength of someone who rises again and again, despite the weight of the world. The town began to look at each other differently too, noticing the invisible burdens carried by neighbors. The widow's tired eyes, the teenager's nervous stutter, the veteran's scarred hands. They began to ask themselves what it meant to stand up, to speak out, to choose decency when it's easier to look away. Carla's story became more than a moment in a diner. It became a mirror, reflecting the choices we make when no one's watching, the courage it takes to act when silence feels safer. In a world that moves too fast, where it's easy to scroll past pain or assume someone else will care, her stand was a clarion call. Every time we stay silent in the face of cruelty, we let it grow louder, bolder, more entrenched. But every time we choose to act, whether with words, a gesture, or simply refusing to look away, We reaffirm that respect still matters, that dignity is worth defending. How many people do we pass each day carrying wounds we can't see? A limp that tells of battles fought, a scar that hides a story of survival, a silence that speaks louder than any shout? Not every hero seeks the spotlight, but everyone deserves to walk through the world unbroken by disrespect. Carla's courage wasn't just for her, it was for every person who's ever felt invisible, every soul waiting for someone to care. Her story asks us to look closer, to act braver, to remember that the quietest acts of honor can echo the loudest.